Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome you to the series on history, science, and faith in Islam. It is designed to foster a renewal of faith based on knowledge. In the last session, we examined the eruption of the Fatimids in North Africa. The current session is a continuation of the first part. It was under Mu'iz, who passed away in 975, that the Fatimids achieved their greatest success. Mu'iz first turned his attention to the west. Taking advantage of the preoccupation of the Spanish Umayyad Abdurrahman III with the Christians to the north, Mu'iz took Mauritania and brought the Maghrib, with the exception of the small Ceuta Tangier Peninsula, under his control. The powerful Spaniards blocked any further advance to the west, so Mu'iz turned his attention to the east, where conditions were much more favorable. The Buyid takeover of Baghdad in 945 had so weakened the Abbasids that the Fatimids sensed their golden opportunity to capture Egypt. At the time, Egypt was under the military control of the Ishkhadids, a Turkish clan who had displaced the Tulunids in 933 and were ruling in the name of the Abbasids in Baghdad. Abbasid power in the eastern Mediterranean had been further weakened by the Byzantine attacks in Anatolia, Crete, and Syria. The Fatimids marched with a force of more than 100,000 Berbers, Sinhajas, and Sudanese under a Turkish general, al-Rumi, and in a pitched battle on the banks of the Nile in 969, defeated the Ishkhadids. The victorious Fatimids entered Egypt and founded a new capital near Old Fustat, which they named Al-Qahira, that is Cairo, in the year 969. With Egypt under his control, Mu'iz's armies fanned out into Syria and took Damascus in 973. Mecca and Medina fell soon thereafter. For almost 100 years, it was the name of the Fatimid sovereigns in Cairo and not of the Abbasids in Baghdad that was taken after the Friday sermons in the great mosques of Mecca and Medina. The Fatimids were bound to attempt the conquest of Asia to fulfill their vision of a universal Islamic empire ruled by the Fatimid Imams. In this attempt, they were not to be successful. There were several reasons for this failure. The Karamatians, a splinter group amongst the Fatimids, considered the mainstream Fatimids soft on the Sunnis. The revolution they hoped for had not materialized. Instead, the Fatimids, with some exceptions, had established a working relationship with their Sunni subjects. The disgruntled Karamatians attacked Fatimid positions in Syria and twice invaded Egypt. They were beaten back with heavy losses, but they controlled the military routes to northern Syria and hence effectively blocked the Fatimid advance into Syria. Second, the Buyids, who controlled Iraq and Persia, resisted the Fatimids for ideological reasons. The Buyids considered Imam Musa Qadim to be the heir to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. They considered the Fatimids to be renegades who followed Imam Ismail after Imam Ja'far. Although the Buyids controlled Baghdad, they had established a working relationship with the majority Sunnis and had shied away from displacing the Abbasid Khalifas. Third, there was a resurgent Byzantine Empire, which had built up its naval power, captured Crete, and continuously challenged both the Abbasids and the Fatimids in the eastern Mediterranean. Fourth, the Seljuk, namely the Turkish presence in Persia and Central Asia, was decidedly in favor of the Abbasids and tilted the balance of power in favor of Orthodox Islam. Egypt prospered under the Fatimids. No longer was the Nile Valley a mere province with its tax revenues carted off to faraway Baghdad. It was now the center of an empire extending from the Euphrates to the Atlantic. Sitting astride the continents of Africa and Asia, Egypt controlled the trade routes from North Africa and Europe to India and the Far East. Gold flowed into Egypt from Ghana, providing a firm basis for a solid currency. The bazaars of Cairo were full of goods from East Africa, India, Indonesia, and China. Alexandria became a port of exchange and a world-class trade center. European travelers such as William of Tyre marveled at the prosperity of Egypt. Italian merchants in Venice, capitalizing on the proximity of Egypt, became successful entrepreneurs. Venice grew in wealth and power and was to play an important role in the Crusades looming on the horizon. Conversely, the loss of Egypt and North Africa meant that hard times had fallen upon Baghdad. Cut off from the Mediterranean by the Fatimids and the Byzantines, Baghdad became dependent for its trade on land routes to India and China. Loss of revenues meant loss of political power, and the Khalifas in Baghdad became increasingly dependent on the Turkish sultans for their revenues. The sultans, in turn, raided India with increasing frequency in search of gold and plunder. Between the years 1000 and 1030, Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna conducted no less than 17 raids into India. The territories of the Khilafat extended to no more than a few miles outside Baghdad. Since the power of the fatwa had been co-opted by the ulama after the earliest days of Islam, the Khilafat became in effect a wistful symbol of long-lost Muslim unity. Decentralization set in, hastening the fragmentation of Asia into principalities and local kingdoms. This was a social political matrix almost tailor-made for the rise of the Seljuk Turks, who rose from nomads to become the masters of Asia. Mu'iz died in 996, and his son Al-Aziz became the Khalifa in Cairo. He was a consummate ruler and an able organizer. He appointed a well-known financier, Yaqub bin Kilis, as his minister. Kilis wisely managed the fiscal affairs of the far-flung empire. Taxation was reduced, trade encouraged, currency stabilized, and the empire prospered. Al-Aziz also built a powerful navy as a counterweight to the resurgent Byzantines and the Umayyads in Spain. But he also recruited Turkish soldiers into his army to balance off the Berbers and the Sudanese, a decision that in time led to the takeover of the Fatimid dynasty by the Turks. Al-Hakim succeeded his father Al-Aziz as the Khalifa in 996, the same year that Pope Gregory V declared the Crusades against the Muslims. Al-Hakim, an eccentric man, killed his regent Barjawan, forbade women to appear in the streets, prohibited business at night, persecuted the minority Jews and the Christians, and in 1009 began the demolition of churches and synagogues. This was a reaction to the laxity of his father, who had married a Christian and was protecting his flank against charges of laxity leveled by the Sunnis. Perhaps also he was suspicious of the Christians in his midst because the Crusades had started in earnest in 996 with attacks on North Africa. The Fatimids controlled a vast empire, but they had to continually come to terms with the standards of moral rectitude and religious dogma of their subjects. The dominant opinion in the community, espoused by the Orthodox, that is Sunni Islam, had always gravitated towards a consensus based on the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and Ijma of the companions. Such consensus was the central axis around which Muslim history revolved, although at times the impact of peripheral opinions proved to be important. Al-Hakim was faced with a rising military challenge from Christian Europe, while guarding his rear against Orthodox discontent with the perceived excesses of the Fatimids. His father Al-Aziz was a compromiser who had tried to weld together a consensus of tolerance by marrying a Christian. Al-Hakim began a drive to convert the Sunnis and the Ithna Asharis to Fatimid doctrines. A Darul Hikmah was established in 1004 in Cairo to impart training to Fatimid Da'is, meaning missionaries. Fatimid propaganda was extremely active throughout the Islamic world. There was even a Fatimid ruler in Multan in what is today Pakistan. In the year 1058, the Fatimids briefly controlled the suburbs of Baghdad itself. These attempts drew an immediate reaction from Baghdad, where the Abbasid Khalifa Al-Khaim denounced the Fatimids as renegades. In 1017, two Fatimid Daites, Hamza and Darazi, arrived in Cairo from Persia. They preached that the divine spirit transmitted through Ali ibn Abu Talib radiallahu anhu and the Imams had been transmitted to Al-Hakim, who had thus become God incarnate. The doctrine was repugnant to the Orthodox Egyptians. So Darazi retired to the mountains of Lebanon, where he found a more favorable reception. The Duruz, followers of Darazi doctrines, are to be found in Lebanon and Syria today. They believe in reincarnation and Al-Hakim as the reincarnate of God who will return at the end of the world. Messianism as a reaction to political oppression is a recurrent theme in Islamic history. The belief that a Mahdi will return to re-establish a just world order after the example of the Prophet ﷺ recurs in many parts of the Muslim world. This belief is to be found among the entire spectrum of Islamic opinion, Sunni, Twelver Shia, and Fatimid Shia. It occurred with greater fervor in the Sudan, Persia, and India. Concrete examples of this are to be found in the appearance of the Mahdi in modern Sudan in the 19th century, the movement of Uthman Dan Fodio in West Africa in the 19th century, the beliefs of the Mahdavi sect in India, the disappearance of the 12th Imam among the Twelvers, and the disappearance of the 7th Imam amongst the Seveners. Messianism is not without its ideological pitfalls. Most Muslims managed their Messianism within the limits of Tawheed and stayed in the mainstream of Islam. The Fatimid positions on the transmutation of the soul, advanced by Al-Hakim, were rejected by Orthodox Muslims as heresy. The excesses of Al-Hakim hastened the downfall of the Fatimids. Under Al-Mustansir, who ruled from 1036 to 1096, civil strife took over. Berber, Sudanese, and Turkish troops competed for power in the armed forces. In 1047, Hejaz broke away and the name of the Fatimid monarchs was removed from the khutbah in the great mosques of Makkah and Medina. The Murabitun revolution consumed the Maghrib in 1051. During the period 1090 to 1094, Egypt was hit with a severe drought of biblical proportions, and the economy was crippled. The Crusades, active first in Spanish and in the North African coast, descended upon North Africa, and then onto Eastern Mediterranean. In 1072, Palermo in Sicily was lost to the Crusaders. By 1091, all of Sicily was under Latin control. Mahdia, the first capital of the Fatimids, was attacked by sea. Meanwhile, the Turks and the Fatimids fought for control of the Syrian highlands. Seljuk warriors regained Damascus from the Fatimids and re-established the authority of the Fatimids all the way to El Arish, which is today in Egypt. Under Taghr al-Bey and Alp Arsalan, all of Asia, except for a few strongholds like Accra and Jerusalem, were taken from Egyptian control. The lines of control ran through a plateau, embracing Jerusalem. Hostility between the Seljuks and the Fatimids prevented any effective coordination against the Crusaders, who took Jerusalem by assault from the Fatimid garrison in 1099. The retreating Fatimids turned to assassination for vengeance. Under Hassan Sabah, the assassins became an effective underground movement and wreaked havoc on the Seljuks with their cloak and dagger murders. After Muntasir, who died in 1096, the Fatimid court presented a long saga of murders and mayhem. Power passed on to the viziers, who wielded their authority through intrigue and assassination. In 1171, the last of the Fatimid Khalifas, Al-Adid, died. Salahuddin abolished the Fatimid dynasty, and Egypt passed once again into the Abbasid domain. Civilizations are held together by transcendental ideas. After the first four Khalifas, Islamic civilization lost the transcendence of Tawheed. The Fatimids came to power, promising to bring the transcendence back to the world of Islam. They captured half of the Islamic world, but remained a minority elite ruling over a vast Sunni world. Umayyad Spain challenged their authority. Sub-Saharan Africa remained loyal to Abbasid authority. Yet, the Fatimid presence in Egypt marks a high point in the development of Islamic civilization. The monarchs in Baghdad, Cairo, and Khartaba, each claiming to be the Khalifa, competed with each other in establishing universities, encouraging learning, art, and culture. The Fatimids established Al-Azhar University, the oldest surviving institution of higher learning in the world. That was done in 971. We must also note, though, that the Qayrawun University in Fez, Morocco, was founded in 812 and is still functioning. Universities in Baghdad, Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur, Cairo, Palermo, Qayrawun, Sijil Masha, and Toledo competed with each other in attracting men of learning. Artisans were encouraged to produce the finest works of art. Egyptian brocades, brasswork, and woodwork were valued throughout Europe and Asia. It was through Sicily, no less than through Spain, that Islamic ideas and knowledge were passed on to Europe. Even during the height of the Crusades, Latin monarchs employed and patronized Muslim scholars. The Sicilian monarchs considered it an honor to be buried in caskets made in Egypt. Roger II of Sicily not only continued the University of Palermo, which had been established by the Muslims, he also patronized at his court the well-known geographer Al-Idrisi, who was one of the finest scholars of the age. Islamic history is animated by a vision to establish a universal community, enjoining what is right, forbidding what is wrong, and believing in God. But there have been different interpretations of this vision. In the 10th century, there were at least 4 different versions of that vision. The Fatimids, based in North Africa, claimed the imamate in the lineage of Imam Ismail. The Karamatians were also Fatimids, but were extremist in their views and believed that their version of Islam be imposed on all Muslims by force if necessary. The Buyids were Twelvers who believed in the imamate in the lineage of Imam Musa Kazim. Then there were the Sunnis, the vast majority of the population, who accepted the Khilafat in Baghdad. In the 10th century, these conflicting visions collided on the political military plane. And out of this confusion emerged the victorious Turks, displacing both the Khilafat and the Imamate by a new military political institution, the Sultanate. The excesses of the age gave birth to a revolution, the Murabitun revolution in Africa, and provoked the dialectic of Al-Ghazali, which altered the way Muslims looked upon Islam itself. Their internal rivalry denied the Muslims their last chance to conquer Europe. In the 9th and the 10th centuries, Europe lived in an age of imagination, dominated by the talisman and ruled by feudal lords. After the death of Charlemagne in 814, his Carolingian heirs fought amongst themselves for the remnants of the Frankish kingdom. Faced with Viking attacks from the north, Europe could not defend itself in the south and was militarily vulnerable. The mutual hostility between the Fatimids, the Umayyads, and the Abbasids prevented them from exploiting this historical window of opportunity. The Aghlabid conquest of Sicily and the raids into southern Italy as far as Rome in 846 marked the furthest advance of Muslims into southern France and Europe. The armies of the Fatimids, the Umayyads, the Buyuds, and the Abbasids spent their energies primarily at each other's throats. This concludes our coverage of Fatimid rule in Egypt. In the next session, inshallah, we'll cover the onset of the Crusades Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.